it's easy to forget sometimes, like the the go-to narrative when it comes to Pretendo discussions on the internet, because we're always bogged down by people just getting into hyper specialized arguments, complaining about third-party games, complaining about frame rates or resolutions, complaining about aging hardware, complaining about like this or that with this franchise, right? It's really easy to forget like what the core argument actually is when it comes down to why Nintendo consoles are seen as inferior to other consoles. And it's graphics, right? The only reason people tend to downplay major Nintendo IPs like Pokemon and Mario is because they aren't realistically rendered, right? They don't look as good as the real games on the big boy platforms, right? Like, oh, my high-end gaming PC can run this game at like at like 8K at 60 frames per second. Like, nobody cares, right? Nobody cares about that at all. Pokemon, not even like the newest generations, like, classic Game Boy Pokemon from like 1998 or whatever, is still more fun than any slop you have on your high-end gaming PC. And I've come to realize it actually does look better, right? One of the big go-to copes when it comes to Pokemon on Switch is that like, oh, it doesn't look good. It's not it's not visually interesting. Like, look at something like Xenoblade Chronicles X. That looks way better, doesn't it? And I actually am playing through Xenoblade Chronicles X right now, and I am really enjoying it. But I've come to realize that no, Xenoblade does not look as good as Pokemon, because Pokemon is the brand with actually iconic, recognizable character designs, right? They actually have a variety in how characters are presented, how they're utilized, how they're incorporated into the world. You get all these like memorable characters, strewn throughout the landscape, living in like their own environment, with a really fleshed out, ecosystem, and just all around, Pokemon is just an extremely well thought out universe, as opposed to Xenoblade, where like you just have like a bunch of things just thrown everywhere. Like, yeah, let's have level 80 dinosaurs right next to these like level 2 insects. Like, again, it makes no sense. It doesn't feel organic. It doesn't feel natural. It doesn't feel real. Xenoblade looks vaguely more realistic, and yet it doesn't have as memorable or iconic as character designs. The character designs in Pokemon are far superior than what you would see in something like Xenoblade or any other video game property for that matter. They understand how to make their characters appealing and how to make them visually interesting. Like, again, this is something that people don't understand when it talks about graphics. Like, there's more to looking good than simply being realistically rendered or detailed, right? Xenoblade may look vaguely more realistic, and yet it trails well behind Pokemon where it actually matters with the key character designs. Does anyone even care about any of the monsters in Xenoblade? They're just kind of there. Like in all 4 games, it's just like, oh man, there's some things walking around in a field that'll stop us if we go this way. Like, there's no thought put into it. There's no creativity. They're just kind of there, right? Like with Pokemon, it's like an essential part of the setting, right? It's so well implemented and iconic and memorable. And the cope among people is that like, well, Pokemon's been around forever. Like, but we've been consistently getting great games every 3 years since the series inception, right? Every couple of years we get a new generation, we get a new wave of Pokemon, and we continue getting new and new iconic character designs. We are Pokemon has continued to grow and evolve well outside the world of video games. Something that Xenoblade is never, ever, ever going to do. Right? This is the reality of the situation, right? This is why Nintendo has been able to dominate PlayStation and Xbox and PC so thoroughly over the past 30 years, right? Because they understand that there is an appeal to more cartoony visual designs. They understand that simply making something realistic or making it more mature or making it aimed at a specific demographic, that does not inherently make it better. Okay? And that is something I think Xenoblade fans really need to wrap their minds around when it comes to the whole Game Freak versus Monolith Soft discussion. Because, yeah, Monolith Soft do their thing. They're very good at it. Yeah. Like, there's nothing wrong with that. But, like, Game Freak created something truly special. A true cultural phenomenon that has stayed on top of the world for decades, right? And it's entirely because of this game's unique visual design, its presentation, how it appeals to its target demographic, right? Like, Xenoblade is simply something that coasts by on this idea that, like, it's more realistic and mature than other Nintendo brands, right? In a lot of ways, it's a replacement for Metroid in that sense. And yeah, there's nothing wrong with like liking Monolith Soft or what they do and like the Xenoblade IP as a whole, but like, constantly attacking another brand for its perceived inability to deliver on the scale of like what Monolith Soft tries to do, like, you don't really seem to understand that these are different demographics, that Pokemon is a completely different kind of RPG compared to what Xenoblade does, right? Like, the age groups are different, the skill levels is different, right? Like, again, Xenoblade is not inherently better than Pokemon because it's more realistic or it targets like a more mature demographic. Like, people need to understand that Pokemon absolutely is on top of their game. There's been this like incredibly strong inability among the community to like admit just how like high quality the TCG is, how high quality the anime is right now, how high quality the games themselves are, because doing so would be to admit that they lost, right? That they completely failed to downplay Nintendo in the 90s. Like, people always say this thing that like, oh, the N64 didn't have any RPGs, like completely ignoring the Game Boy and what would become the biggest RPG franchise on the planet, right? Again, it's just a giant cup, right? All of these narratives you see in regards to like these Nintendo games, everything you see people try to do, it's just a giant cope to downplay the success of Nintendo.